Hi, welcome to Discussions of Music, Healing, and Consciousness with your hosts, Chris Noble and Bill Prodsman. In today's episode, we're talking all about the magic of live music, musical communication, and expression. In other words, the beauty of experiencing music live, the communication that happens on stage with musicians telepathically, as well as the communication and expression experienced by the audience. We'll also go into how you can be performing your own music in your own unique ways at whatever skill level to express yourself and to relieve stress, anxiety, and to honestly just have some fun. We'll be talking about other art forms and modalities that help you relieve stress and just overall feel great to do. We'll be talking about all those things and much, much more as always in our open conversations here on Discussions of Music, Healing, and Consciousness.
I don't know how spontaneous this is.
I do too. I was literally talking to my folks just before hopping on this call, and they're like, "So how do you prepare for these podcasts?" I'm like, I wouldn't use the word prepare. It's too much. and I say that in the best way. I'm like, well, I don't know. We just get on and catch up a bit, and then find something that sounds like fun to talk about, and then we'll go for it. So
Yeah.
That seems to be it. And I guess today for me, it was that amazing jazz band or jazz artist, Evan Christopher. Was that his name?
Yeah. Hey, let's call it out. Let's name some names here.
Evan Christopher. Bill sent me an amazing video, Jazz in Marciac. I don't know how you pronounce that, in 2014, Farewell Blues. It's an amazing, just an amazing performance. And when I was watching it, I was transported to my days playing in a reggae jazz band back in Toronto we had a monthly gig at a beautiful little jazz bar in Kensington Market, which is kind of like the Greenwich Village of Toronto. And anyway, it reminded me of telepathic communication that happens in music.
Right. Yeah.
Excuse me. Or in other words, just the nonverbal communication that audience members will see happening on stage and musicians will experience when they're in that moment. But then you mentioned something, Bill, about, what is it with sound healers and music therapists, perhaps, what do they encounter? And have you had friends or other people tell you about their experiences, in that situation of sound healing, having a nonverbal almost communication with their client? Has that happened, or have you heard of that happening?
I imagine it does. It hasn't happened to me personally, and I haven't spoken to anybody who works in that way, other than right now. I mean, honestly, Chris, first time I've ever thought of that, but doesn't it make sense that
it makes perfect sense to me?
Right. So I'm really curious for you, as a sound healer, how that works. And then, I think it's related to how we read audiences or feel with audiences. And certainly when we're in a band and working with the guys in the band, you get that same kind of interaction. So I'm really interested in where this goes. Well,
the thing that I think the audience would benefit to hear from is the perspective of musicians like you and me, and what that nonverbal communication feels like when we're performing on stage, and then extrapolate that into the sound healing side of things, which I do have some personal experience with as well. So for myself, I'll use my old reggae jazz band as an example, and my God, the communication with that band, we've been playing together probably close to 10 years at this point. We've been off and on, but certainly knew each other very well. And when you get to that kind of a relationship, I think with anybody in any field, you could be in film, you could be in tech, you could be in whatever, but when you work with the same people, right, that you really vibe well with, that you get along with, that you work well with, and you develop that, again, this way of working with each other where you kind of finish each other's sentences, or you already know what the other is going to kind of do, so you do something complementary to that, right? It's the same thing with music. In my experience, what it feels like, not only it feels incredible, it's a natural high into of itself, but you really do find that the music in a way also becomes part of the communication. So for example, the drummer might start a song off and he's got this beat, and he'll look around and he'll maybe look at me and he'll be like, he gives me this look as to okay, what are you going to add to this? Right.
Right.
How are you going to start this piece or this song or this story? And then I'll add something. And then that whatever I add is going to influence what he's doing or she's doing. And then the next player in the band is going to be like, okay, so you guys are doing this. I think this is going to go nice with that. And none of this is spoken out loud. None of this is like, okay, Chris, play this in B flat and this and that. Sometimes that can happen. But in my circumstances, it never happened at all. Things would just start to be played and then people would fall in line, but it fell in line perfectly, harmoniously, beautifully. And that can only happen when you're having this untethered nonverbal communication that really happens through music. I know you've had this, Bill, with your performances. Like, what have you experienced in that kind of realm?
Yeah, I have. It's part of learning to be a musician, I think.
Good point.
And I've never really had to like learn it. It's always been there, but I've had people try to explain it later. In college, part of the music track was to accompany a vocal recital. So every undergraduate piano player had to do this. And the music teacher was, the vocal teacher was there, like sort of instructing me what to do. And I'm like, dude, I've been doing this for a while, right? By that time, I'd been, a Dixieland band for a while. I've been in pit orchestras and been playing in the symphony, just like all this stuff. So I got it. But one of the things that was really interesting was her focus on breath. So if you're accompanying a singer, or actually anybody who plays a wind instrument, if you're breathing the same way they're breathing, you're going to be there for them exactly where you need to be. And that whole idea of everybody breathing together isn't something I thought about too much. Playing the Dixieland band in high school, or playing in any of the ensembles or symphonies or whatever. But when you get into a really intimate environment where there's just maybe four of you jamming together at the same time, you kind of entrain. And once it's like the MIDI click or the MIDI sync, right? Once you're all synced up that way, nothing can go wrong.
Yeah.
You're just in the lane together at the same moment, or the same beat, or however you want to say, breath. And that it's such a great feeling. And where the guardrails are, and what you can do to bend them, and where all of you can go together, not too far in one direction or the other, if you're kind of keep moving forward. And it's such a great feeling to just be in that space. And it's literally true. Anything can happen there, right?
Yeah. It's one of the best feelings, excuse me, of being a musician, in my mind. There's also, of course, the high you get from the audience and the interaction there. But man, one of the things I miss the most, and recording this in 2021 in December, one of the things I miss the most right now about music is being able to play with other musicians in our typical, environments that we used to play in pre 2020. And so because it's that interaction, it's that connection. You said it so well. The entrainment, the synergy, or the syncing of everyone's brain or consciousness that happens. And when I say everyone, I certainly mean the musicians specifically on stage. In that unit, in that band, like our brains. I would love to see an experiment. Maybe there is one already done on this, where they have those EEG scans, or those neurological devices that they put in your brain or your head, and to measure your brain activity, and put that on a jazz band. A really good jazz band's been playing together a long time. They don't have to be top of the top, but just like anybody that's been playing together for a while will have that kind of nonverbal communication. And what happens in the brain when that's going on, I would love to know. And Seriously. If anyone listening knows, please let us know in the comments.
I know that if we looked at stuff, we'd see similarities around the beat.
Definitely.
Where there's the thump that happens in every time slice. I wonder how that is for drummers who can play 2 against 3, or 4 against 5 and 2 against 3 at the same time, using 2 feet and 2 hands. What does their scan look like? How do they sync up? What's happening there? And then if you look around the rest of the quartet or trio, whoever's playing, what are they focusing on to entrain? Yeah. And I'm asking this because I'm in this place right now where I've been thinking deeply about consciousness and the brain and the mind. And I think the brain is just responding to something else. Mm-hmm. So when the trio gets together and the drummer counts it in, maybe it's the beat, but it's something bigger than that, because every one of the folks in the trio is going to bend the beat one way or the other to make it cool. It's not always going to happen precisely on one. It's, they're going to swing it, they're going to shade it, it'll fade, it'll whatever. And yet it all works. So, okay, so maybe they're synced up to the beat and they each know how they're going to do that, but how do they do it at the same time? Right?
Yeah.
They don't make an agreement to just,
No.
this far or that far away from the actual downbeat. It just is, it's magic. And more so, and if you tried this, at home, like record a piece of music or something and then have MIDI play it back and it sounds so mechanical.
Yep.
But the same trio could play the same notes and it would totally be musical.
Yes.
So I think it's something bigger than the brain. And yeah, it'd be fun to look at the brain and see what it's doing and how it lights up. But what if we could look at that other thing? The thing that makes the music part of it happen, and not just see it as like an echo of what the musicians intended, which is how the brain works, right? The brain is sort of after the fact, if you can.
It's so true though, Bill. Like I'm thinking, I just heard this recently where, the brain is only really forming its opinions based on previous experience.
True, yeah.
It only knows what it's already experienced. The brain is not something you want to use to innovate, to come up with new ideas. It's actually something that it's a computer, and it's a computer that does incredible processing, but it is only processing off of previous experiences.
So it's a pattern matching.
It's pattern matching. It's after the fact. It is the not the cleanup crew, but it is kind of it's after the initial wave of an idea or a thought or the seed of a new creation. And that new creation or new thought or new idea does not come from the brain. And I know there's science more and more out there that is showing this, that it's our consciousness that is not only necessarily coming up with that thought, it's also our bodies, maybe in conjunction with our consciousness, that are not coming up with the thought, but they're allowing the thought to come in. And there's a difference, because sometimes, actually not sometimes, almost all the time, if I'm improvising, for example, on piano, I don't even necessarily go in with an intention all the time. Sometimes I do,
right,
but sometimes I don't. And what comes out baffles me just as much as it would baffle anyone else as to what comes out. So I didn't come up with that idea. It came through me or to me, and then my body carried it out. And I find the best musicians, and you can see them, they're clearly in another realm of consciousness when they're in their
channeling. Is that
channeling, flow state, whatever, right? Like, I think we've got lots of different words. Channeling, I'd say, is one of the best. Flow state is another. And what's going on there? I think you're right. I think there's something way more than just the brain processing things. There's something higher, consciousness wise, that's going on.
Yeah, you could really tell it too. And I'm using trio on purpose. A few weeks ago, we went to hear a trio, and the drummer, who was an amazing percussionist and composer and everything else, was the reason we were there. So there was a piano player and a bassist. The drummer and the bassist were completely in the zone. It was so obvious. And the piano player was touching it, but it wasn't inspired. Maybe it's just my opinion, but you know how you can hear where there's a musician who's incredibly good at what they do, like a studio musician can come in and they can nail it.
Yeah.
Right. And they can play, they can string all the riffs together that they learn to play, so they can make a solo happen in the moment in any key. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it felt like that, right? And it was awesome. There was nothing wrong. It was just totally perfect. But the drummer and the bassist were so far ahead of this guy, right, that he sounded like he was working to catch up, and he wasn't. But there was that feel of, I don't even know what the analogy is, because the only one that I can come up with is this musical one, where you're in a group, and there's somebody in the group that just isn't in the moment, right? They aren't dialed in on it yet, right? Like, go have a couple more puffs.
Honestly, the reggae band, that was totally one of the remedies,
right? And or whatever it takes to get you into the zone. And I just feel like, as present and as amazing as you can be, there's that little bit of magic that takes place, whether it's entrainment or whatever we're going to call it, right? But there's that little extra bit. And this can work with total strangers. I mean,
Yep.
it really does.
Yeah.
I've seen it happen, and every so often I've been fortunate enough to be part of it, where you sit down with somebody for the very first time and they look over at you with this intensity, and all of a sudden you're in the place. Like your skin crawls and you go, oh my gosh, I'm here now, right?
I love it.
And it's just like you're there. So that's kind of where I wanted to take this, which is if you're as a healer in that place and someone comes to you and say, please, I'm feeling X, right? Help me. And you do that. Is that the same kind of effect that I felt that time when, this monstrous, amazing jazz bassist looked over at me and I was in the place, right? It was like, bang, you're not going anywhere, Bill. You're mine, right?
Well, first of all, I would have loved to have seen that performance, Bill, because those are always such special.
That's the only thing I remember about
it. Well, usually you don't remember a lot, because when you're in that zone, in that flow, you're in a state of no thought. That's the beauty of it, is you're not thinking. And that's what's I find so fascinating about the brain, is that a lot of the time when the true genius comes in, that's because you've turned your brain off. Yeah. So when we think that we need to solve a problem or come up with a solution or figure out a way around something, sometimes it's the opposite. It's like, maybe don't think at all and let it come to you. Let the idea or the answer, the solution come to you, because I think we try to think things through too much almost. Brain's important to think, but I think we think too much. And in these moments of utter musical genius and other areas of genius, of course, in any other modality or art form or whatever, it comes usually in the form of when you're just not thinking. And then that's when you have this amazing flow. With sound healing, from what very minimal amounts I've experienced, because I'm not a certified sound healer or anything, still usually going through the modalities of it being through music. However, my friends who are sound therapists especially, they have, just like musicians do, a set of templates, we can call them rules to a degree, and basically functions that help. And they help on a very general level, and it's good to know what these things are. And then when someone comes to you and says, I have this type of an emotional problem or this physical ailment, how could you help me? Those things are helpful to tap into. But I know that a lot of sound healers will also, outside of that, will also incorporate a lot of improvisation, channeling, flow state performances, whatever you want to call it. Because in that moment, what you can also do is you can, as we're learning now as human beings, we're multi-sensory beings, far beyond our five senses, and we can sense frequencies, and our emotions have frequencies, right? And so when a good sound healer sits down with a client, either through Zoom or in person, because they both kind of work, you can tap into that person's energy and where they're at in that moment right then and there. Much like a musician reads the room. You're reading the audience. Like, I had a whole mellow set planned, but this audience clearly is craving some high tempo, high energy stuff. I'm going to have to figure something out because I want to meet what they're needing right now. I sense that. I think it's the same with sound therapists. They'll have a client where they sense what's going on, and then they just kind of almost stop thinking and use whatever instrument, probably a crystal healing bowl or their voice or both, and then they'll do what they're going to do. And so I've kind of seen it where it's like there are methodologies that also get integrated, but on top of that, or mixed into that, there's a very similar improvisational approach to sound healing. And I think that's important because in medicine, we can get really caught up in figuring out one specific solution and formula, and then test it, repeat it, and apply it to everything.
Great point. Yes.
Doesn't work that way with this kind of stuff. And I think everyone's different. Everyone is nuanced. Therefore, the approach to that person has to be different every single time. And the easiest way to do that is to simply not think, tap into the energy, kind of get into the zone, so to speak, and let whatever needs to come through you. And almost always, without question, the person receiving it will say like, wow, that is exactly what I needed.
Right. Yeah. It's like when a song hits you on some random playlist and it's exactly what you need and you just feel it, right? So you make this interesting point that reminds me a long time ago, maybe it's still called the healing arts, but remember when the healing arts were called the healing arts?
Yeah.
And so there's this separation now between the arts and the healing arts. And aren't the arts always healing?
Yes. Obviously. Absolutely. When did this separation, now that you mention it, you're right. Like, when did that kind of happen?
I think, well, I'm not going to blame science for it, but there is a need to be able to predict in advance what aspirin's going to do for you, for example.
Yeah.
And know something about that, so you can say with some certainty that what you're going to apply is going to work. Just like the sound healers that have protocols and music therapists that have protocols, there's some reasonableness to that, and I get it. But there also needs to be art. The bedside manner, if we're going to talk about that, something that allows you to relax into the process, whether that's listening to a concert or finding peace with a sound healing therapy of some kind, or whatever it is, and balancing the art and the science.
It's very key.
Isn't that the job? I mean, you can't just show up unless you're Kanye West, you can't just show up and go for it and have everything work and people go nuts and like you. But somewhere between that and the player piano that hits every note perfectly, there's got to be art for it to have any meaning, and certainly for it to have some healing effect, I think, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you got the Bob Ross's happy accidents too,
Right.
Like, how do you have those? I mean, there's so many references in the arts, and not just the arts, in tech and science and innovation all around, where accidents led to the biggest breakthroughs. I mean, so many times. Sure. So once again, going in with this idea that everything has to be perfect and every note has to be played perfectly, and the modality of healing has to go exactly through these protocols. I mean, we all know that's a very limited way of looking at it, because it doesn't make any room for innovation, for new thought, new ideas, and of course mistakes that turn into be the best part about the whole performance or the whole experience, right?
What mistakes you might miss if you're watching it on a functional MRI or something, right?
Yes.
You might never even see that tiny little blip that was the thing that caused, Chick Corea to take a different kind of a solo that day. I don't know, whatever.
True. It's so true.
Right? And who cares if you mapped it out? Even though you have the map, it still doesn't correlate to the notes that got played, right? Or the healing art that happened, the energy transmission that happened. That's not even. There's no time for that.
No, there's not. There's not.
It's just moving, it's just flowing, and you've got to go with it, or you get in the way.
And it's just going back to the feeling of it. It feels so good to drop out of your left brain. We're so in our left brain. Nothing wrong with the left brain, but we're always in it, and we literally neglect 50%, like the right side of our brain. And of course, it's not just as simple as that, but it is in the sense of, when we take the art out of things, and it's just healing, and it's not the healing arts anymore. You take that creative right brain aspect out of it, and now it's gone back into a logical, more formulaic left brain approach, which has its place, but it needs to be balanced with the right brain. It needs to be balanced with the creativity, with the innovation, with that openness to create new ideas, and to every circumstance that comes up, whether it's through healing or through an actual performance, to always kind of throw out the rule book when it feels right to throw out the rule book. Sometimes I'm so grateful I have the rule book, and I need it in that moment, and I go right to it, and I do something pretty similar to what is needed in that time. But then there's some times where it literally has to get thrown out the window, and thank God, because whatever happens after that performance or with a client in a healing situation, regardless, they always turn out to be almost always very beneficial circumstances, typically also propelling that creator far forward in their own career, because they're learning new things, developing new techniques, coming up with completely new ideas, which when's that a bad thing, right?
This must be why so many of the top people record everything they do.
Yeah.
Going back and trying to remember it later is without the reference recording is just really tough. And this goes back to what Sinatra was recording. Every time he went on stage, there was a recorder running someplace, just so he could have the tape to listen to later and figure out what was going on. great use of technology, but right, it also says, I'm not going to necessarily know what I did that night.
That's when you know you're in the moment, though. I think that's always the sign of being truly in the moment, whether it doesn't have to be performance or music related at all, but just being present, being with the audience, being with the room, whether you're giving a sales presentation or you're performing at Madison Square Garden, it's not that different in terms of what are the people in this space, like how are we going to best connect in this circumstance? And there's like, what rule book can ever predict that? You don't know what's happening in the world to influence the people on that day, in that moment. I mean, I remember small little things like, I think it was my first Coldplay concert I saw when I was a kid, and their concerts are amazing because they're just one big sing along, regardless if you're a fan of Coldplay or not. Like they just are like tens of thousands of people belting out all the same lyrics, and it's just so very uplifting. Anyway, Chris Martin, the lead singer, was addressing the audience here in Toronto, where I was seeing the concert at the time, and there had been that very day a plane crash at Pearson Airport, our local airport. Everyone was okay, thank God, but it was a very scary incident, and the band, just like he in that moment, he was starting to play a song, and he was about to start the song, and he cut himself off. He's like, "Oh, I just also wanted to say to the audience, that we're so bloody grateful that everyone on the flight's okay," and he just went on this whole talk about like human life and the importance of it while he was getting into a song. You could tell it was all improvised. There was nothing planned about it. And one of the more beautiful moments of the whole concert, you could feel the whole room, just the love and the compassion that was exuding from everyone after that was just even more palpable. And it's a very small little gesture, very small little thing. But that wasn't part of the plan. And he went off script and went off plan and made a much better experience because of it. So it's being in the moment. You're going to get cues and information, I think, of what you should do in that particular moment versus having a whole set plan beforehand.
Yeah. What an incredible compassionate response, compared to the other kind of stuff that we've seen recently.
Oh,
people were getting trampled to death, and the show kept going on. It's like, come on, guys. I think as any leader, but especially as musicians who get it at a deeper level, don't we have some sort of an obligation to open that door and at least offer it for people to want to walk through? And on that night, everybody went to compassion, and hooray for that, right?
Yeah.
But if we don't open the door, or at least show people that there is one, I don't feel like I've done my job, if that makes any sense,
Oh, yeah.
And obviously people have a choice. But, goodness, people are there for the music, and the music is doing stuff to us all the time. And if it does good stuff, amazing, right? You can set your intention and you get great stuff from music. But if you show up and your intention is not for that, you get a train wreck.
Mm-hmm.
Quite literally, and people get hurt or killed, and that's not right. That's not what music is about.
It's a good point. You bring up like the intention, as we typically seem to get into, is so important, right? And there have been opposite examples of this from performers who are going through whatever they're going through in that moment. Maybe usually stereotypically they're battling also a form of some sort of drug abuse, and it might be at the height of that in their life at that moment. But those performances where the artist is barely there, they're not really present, they're hurting internally, emotionally speaking, and maybe they're turning to a variety of substances to numb that. And in those states, sometimes you actually get brilliant performances, don't get me wrong, but you also can get real train wreck shows where there isn't any compassion because there's none coming from the artist, like the artist doesn't have it for him or herself, and then therefore can't expand that outward to the audience. And then the audience is kind of like, all right, the music's there. Like, we're happy to hear the music, but there is a void, like I'm not feeling the connection, let's just say. Right. So
I want to mention this movie because it's so Janis Joplin. Okay, everybody, this is old school. Take me back a ways. So 1979, the movie was made called The Rose, and it basically it chronicles how Janis sort of came unglued. And Bette Midler is responsible for carrying the Janis Joplin part. It's a fantastic movie, but it illustrates what you're talking about, because we lost a really good one. And if you who follow the music scene, you know what it is that Chris and I are talking about right now. It's really rough. Gosh, what was her name from the UK a few years ago?
Oh, Amy Winehouse.
Yeah, Amy Winehouse. Another tragic thing, But there've been so many of them, and everybody knows what's happening. It's not like it's a mystery to anybody. And you love this performer, and you want the best for them, and you want them to make it through whatever they're going through, and all of that. And so it's this powerful, huge, powerful intention that ultimately, I don't want to say it doesn't work. Who knows what happens, right? But there's that collision right there. And as an audience, to be able to lift up a performer when they're at their lowest feels very, very special. Even if you lose the battle, you were there for that moment. And people, I'm sure, who were there at Janis Joplin's last concert are going to remember it for their lives.
Absolutely.
It's one of those moments. Like if you watched Kennedy get shot, or those things that happen to us, the tragic things. But then you're also able to say on another night, I was there the night that this happened, right? And it's a completely different thing. And it's so joyous and spontaneous and all of that. And the real opportunity here, at least to me, is that we got to live in between those two spaces and fully inhabit the highs and the lows when they come, which you can do successfully with music. Music won't kill you, but it'll take you pretty low and it'll take you pretty high. And it's entirely safe. But you've got to be willing to take the ride, and to do that in a way that does have an intention to see what happens on the other side, right? To ride it through and feel that incredible emotional journey that goes along with it. We were talking before we started recording this, everybody, and both Chris and I have had a couple of weeks that had a lot of highs and lows in them, man. And yet here we are. And I'd so much rather that than just the flat, humdrum, narrow lane kind of stuff. And it's not, we don't think, it's not a mindset thing, guys. It's more about being willing to feel, everything below the neck in an authentic way that really goes deep into you, and welcoming that, which is hard. I get it. On the downside, that's rough, hard to do, but necessary to have the full conscious immersion in it.
I completely agree. And you can't have the highs without the lows. You have to have contrast in order for the opposite to exist. Joy can't exist without suffering. Happiness can't exist without despair or being upset. Joy or bliss can't exist without anger to contrast it, right? The yin and yang of life, the the black and white, the duality of life is always like that. So in moments of being low, to have tools like music as an example to be able to lean on, to allow yourself to feel everything you need to feel in the low moments. There's nothing wrong with being in those states of emotions. But then having those tools like music to get through them, to feel through them, to process what you need to process, and do it with compassion to yourself and others. And then when you've gone through that, it also creates these beautiful highs that you also can appreciate and have all that gratitude towards. And I'm also working personally for myself on a bit of the Stoicism aspect, which is also a little of the neutrality component, where you not that you're not going to feel the beautiful emotions of life, but when you learn to allow the lows to not affect you as much and the highs to not affect you as much, it's not that you're diminishing yourself from experiencing high, beautiful emotions, but you're helping that. There's an analogy used by this Shaolin monk I've been following on YouTube because I'm really getting back into martial arts. And he uses this really brilliant analogy. He's got like a medallion on a string, or like a necklace thing he's got, and he holds the string in his hand, and he pulls the medallion back and then lets it go, and it flies towards his face. And he's like, the higher the emotions you feel in the high in the high moments in your life will then reflect in the low moments of your life the same way. So you're going to feel the lows just as much as you're feeling the highs. If you reduce them, and it doesn't mean that you're not like numbing yourself. You're not cutting yourself off from the beautiful aspects of living, but you're just dialing down the notch in which you you pendulum, I guess, with your emotions.
Right.
And the more even keel you keep it, which is a kind of core component of Stoicism, is that when you're in those low points, they're not going to affect you as much. And guess what? The highs won't either, but it's because you're always in that eternal now, and you're always in that moment of presence, which just accepts what is happening in that moment. Just like in music, when we're talking about improvisation, one of the key components to improv is acceptance. You really will not be a good improviser. And this works within acting and comedy improv as well. I remember this as well from my acting and like theater days. And, nothing is going to ruin a scene faster than someone who doesn't accept what the other actor is giving them or what the other musician is giving them. You know what I mean? Yep. If you don't accept it and you go, well, I don't like what you're doing, I want to do something different. Well, the song or the scene has been ruined because you've already taken that time and we've lost the flow already because you haven't just accepted what that person's given you or what the circumstances have given you, and you're just running with it. And that's like a microcosm or a little metaphor for, I feel like, with life, right? It's just acceptance, radical acceptance of whatever's happening. Okay, I didn't want this to happen, but it's happening. Mm-hmm. How do I deal with it versus, F my life.
So a quick word on Stoicism, because it's come back with a vengeance, and it's really amazing. I get to watch through researchers' eyes, not my own, but sort of as a sideline to the stuff they're doing with veterans and post-traumatic stress. And the research on post-traumatic stress is that it's not, we've said this before, it's not a life sentence. Trauma is not a life sentence. It's an opportunity. And if you take the opportunity and work through it, then post-traumatic stress becomes this invitation. And so they call it post-traumatic growth now. Well, this isn't new.
I love that.
The Stoics knew this. Marcus Aurelius basically knew this. So he was writing about how, he presided over the fall of Rome, dude. That's huge, right? The Roman Empire is collapsing and you're in charge. So he had this acceptance thing. And when you said acceptance, I'm like, yes. So I think that the key here is not to be numb to feelings. A lot of people think that Stoics have basically managed to, reduce all their feelings to this bland level where nothing
robots or something.
Yeah. And it's not mind numb robots. It's about fully experiencing what comes your way, but doing so without judgment, where you go, oh, I'm low, I'm feeling bad, and that's bad. And you get all, upset about it. And when you're happy, you're really feeling happy because it feels much better. Right. And I always choose happy, but I'll tell you what, you can't always choose happy because there are times you're called upon to be, really sad. I mean, imagine whatever, 100 people in the orchestra are playing some tragic Mahler symphony or accompanying an opera, and they have to go there. You cannot sit in your chair and play, any of Verdi's opera music with a stoic, numb, and I'm going to use the word stoic in air quotes, right?
Yeah.
You have to be fully present or you won't get the tone that you want, and the timbre that you want won't come from your instrument. And of course that wrecks it for the audience because they'll be thinking that you're playing to, the opera singers are singing to a recording, right? Or a player piano. And you need that depth. And I so love that you brought that up, because the tough part is we don't like bad stuff. I mean, we don't enjoy that. It's not fun. And yet it's our judgment that gets in the way of the full experience and keeps us from fully experiencing it, and locking all that stuff instead inside where it just boils up until it explodes, right? And nobody wants that either. So it's like we know the psychology of it, and yet we still do it. We still deny ourselves the beautiful experience of being in that incredible tragic moment, which is like going to a movie. It's not real life, it's music, right? Which is kind of a music is real life, but you get the idea, right? You get to be part of this amazing thing without injury. The injury comes when you try to deny yourself the the opportunity. So why am I thinking about this? Oh, because when you're in the flow in music, you can't be judgmental, like you were saying, because you immediately step away from the flow. Yep. You take yourself out of it, right? And if your training is to do that, you'll never have this beautiful experience. I've heard it said that if you believe that you cannot be hypnotized, you can't be hypnotized.
Exactly. Yeah,
and it's like resistance in that way keeps you separate from the thing that is there to feed you, to heal you, not whatever I'm no hypnotist, but we're talking about music here and the healing arts. And if you come in as a skeptic and say, well, this can't possibly work for me, I'm going to listen to, what was Evan Christopher's song? It was Farewell Blues or something like that.
Farewell Blues.
Yeah. It's hard to listen to Farewell Blues and not be happy.
Oh, isn't it?
And it's a blues, right? There's the great paradox, right, in the title. Yeah. But there it is. And if you resist that because it's called Farewell Blues and I'm supposed to be sad now, you're going to miss all the happiness that's happening on stage. Right?
Yes, so joyful.
Or vice versa. So it's really about acceptance, especially when you're in the realm of art. You don't have to be a critic and just sit there and enjoy it because a lot of cool stuff is happening. And that's true for us on the stage as well. We have to get that place where we can enjoy it. If it feels too much like work, it's going to sound like work, and that's not going to be good for anybody.
No.
So whatever it is that gets us to that place, whatever practices take us there, are really, really critical if we're going to be in front of you as an audience, or if a sound healer is going to be with you as a healer or a therapist. That's so important, at least in my mind. That we get that right, that we right from the downbeat, whatever the downbeat is, that we're fully present without judgment and accepting and open as a channel versus, I'm going to give you therapy. Right.
Yeah. I love what you said too about belief, and when the skeptic or when with hypnotherapy, if you don't believe you can be hypnotized, then you won't be hypnotized. I've heard this time and time again. I mean, we know about the placebo effect. That is a phenomenon that is constantly ignored by Western medicine, yet has to, of course, be integrated into all studies because it almost always scores about as high as the actual drug itself.
Right. Is that not crazy? I mean, people, really.
I mean, can we please pay attention to this a little bit more? I mean, if you look into Dr. Joe Dispenza's work, he literally writes about the placebo effect in one of his books. We Are the Placebo, I think, is the title of that. And, looking more into neuroscience, it's very easy, very, very, very easy to start seeing right off the bat that our belief is extraordinarily important. We actually have this confirmed with quantum mechanics, the original experiment that basically created quantum mechanics, the double slit experiment, had these particles going through a slit, light particles that they would shoot through, and then they would see if they would become a particle or a wave when they would go through the slit, breaking them into half. And they realized during this experiment that if it turned into a particle or wave was all dependent on whoever was watching the particle or the wave. Meaning the observer, the person who's running the experiment, played an integral role in the outcome of the experiment, which then, of course, in a sense, makes the experiment, like null and void. Yet at the same time, it proves everything, which is that the
we're
observer,
all in this together.
right? We're all in this together. We're literally connected. Our minds literally create our reality, and our belief system dictates whether or not something is actually going to happen to us or not. It's so what we've really let go of. And I think in the scientific, and I grew up in I was very scientifically raised. I was not raised religiously at all. I was actually raised almost anti-religious. And because that's sort of in the scientific paradigm that we're in now, that is the new religion, is science.
Yeah.
And not to diminish science, I love science, and the scientific method is integral. However, it also misses a lot of other stuff, like the sort of subtleties and also the the non-material aspects of our reality. But beyond that, going back to belief, we can literally do anything if we believe it. And it's not just a wishy-washy, nice thing to say to your kids. It's the literal scientific proof. We have this proof. There's actually an incredible video that has circulated for a while where there's this woman who has a tumor in her body, and she's given an ultrasound, and you can see the tumor real time in her body. And there's these three monks. This is somewhere in Asia. This is happening. These three monks around her, and they're chanting something in their native language, but it's essentially it translates as "it is gone, something like that. And it's all they're chanting is that the tumor has already left her body. The tumor, they're speaking in present tense. It is gone. And the woman on the operating table, so to speak, she's also chanting this with them. And the point of it, and you watch in real time on this ultrasound, the tumor literally disintegrates into nothing in real time. And, oh, is this fake? Is this whatever? Let's just take all that out of the conversation for 2 seconds and show, like, there's other examples I could show, but this is just an example of the power of belief. And if the woman had these 3 monks chanting and she didn't believe, if she was probably from the Western world and was highly skeptical, it wouldn't have worked on her. It simply wouldn't have worked. But because she believed, it did work. So in a sense, it starts to bring in this whole other idea of science and whatnot, because you start to really question, well, if I just believe that I'm not going to get sick from something, if I just believe with every fiber of my being that I will, write an incredible song today, then that's just what's going to happen. It's like the universe, it almost like it meets up with your deep seated belief and desire to make it a reality. I don't know where I was going with that.
No, this spiritual healing has happened for a long time. The earliest examples, I think, in our Christian tradition, at least in the West, come from Jesus in the Bible, and others are earlier in the Old Testament of the Bible, where they've performed, quote, miracles. But it's something that takes place again today. There's faith healers out there who've been sort of given a bad line. I don't know why. I grew up as a Christian Scientist. That's a proven healing method. And as you've just pointed out, in Asia. But this is really incredible about belief, because belief and consciousness are so closely intertwined.
Yeah.
And you can look around the world today, and I just wonder, based on what we see, what people are believing. I see a whole swath of people who are doing incredible things in music, and they have a completely different set of beliefs than the people who are working on climate change, for example. They're working in similar ways, but their belief set is different, and they're committed to doing what they do in such a beautiful way. And then there's what we might call opposite belief sets. I mean, look at the political world. There's all kinds of beliefs in politics, and you can see the results of that. If you just look at it, you go, okay, so here's what happened with this particular set of beliefs. Do I choose that or not, right? And obviously, if you're sitting around as a musician wondering what to play next, you can choose your genre. And a lot of the way that we express ourselves as musicians comes from our beliefs, right?
Yeah.
Like, I believe that Dixieland is fun to play, and so I enjoy playing Dixieland. But other people believe that metal is fun to play, so they play metal. And it's the same effect, different genre. And that's such a lesson for all of us. There's nothing inherently wrong with your Dixieland or metal. There's nothing inherently more musical about Dixieland than metal, or vice versa. It's just what makes you light up. And when you choose that and it aligns with your beliefs and your intentions all flow and whatever, well, that's incredible. That experience is something everybody should have, right? Whatever music it is, whatever healing it is, right? Do that.
I think, and folks listening, I know this will be in the new year that you're listening to this, but we're recording this right in the midst of the holidays here. It's December 20th today. And the reason I mention this is because, one of the things, it's a bit of a tough holiday for, I think, a lot of people, just because of the state of the world and just everything going on right now. Yeah. And going back to belief, I think, and I won't get into this too much, but for just as an example, I find a lot of folks that watch the news every day or the mainstream media, nothing wrong with that. But if you're doing that every single day, there's a belief that comes out of the mainstream media. And the belief is that most things are negative, and because that's what they focus on, and that's what makes the news, is the negative, right? We don't really hear about a lot of positive things happening, because that isn't
the negative stuff sells, right?
It's what sells. It's what's been perpetuated for decades throughout our mainstream evolution of media, right? And whether or not that's right or wrong, that's not part of this discussion. It's more just
you're making a good point.
The point is that the more that is consumed, that becomes the reality, because it's a belief system that's being pushed out to a collective that absorbs it and then takes it into their own belief system. And then that's what they start to see. So for someone who hasn't, myself, I haven't watched the news, in probably close to 6 or 7 years now. Obviously I watch it. It comes up, it's around me, but I don't consciously watch it. Haven't for the last 6 or 7 years. When someone talks to me about the state of the world, I have a very different opinion on it. And it's not that I'm out of touch with what's going on globally. It's hard not to be in the day and age that we live in.
Truly.
I mean, I don't need to be tapped in to know what's going on. And so I hear about it regardless. And so when I can look at the world, I have a bit more of an easier time believing that there's a lot of good going on as well as a lot of negative. I have a much easier time believing that there are solutions, many, many solutions to the current problems. I have a much easier time believing that we're actually moving in a really good direction. A lot of the chaos and pain we're experiencing now, I would consider growing pains, because we're evolving as a species into a whole other level of being with one another. So, that opinion and that belief can come because I've given the option for positivity to be in there, because that's a belief system that I've been able to nurture throughout my life. And is it better or worse? No, that's just me. But, it goes back to belief is so strong. And I think it's something people need to maybe be a bit more conscious of too.
It's really powerful. I mean, we have all this power that we don't necessarily ever really know about. But once you start to dip the toe in the pool, all of a sudden a whole new world opens up. A world of choices that you never knew you had, and options. And what do they call that thing that makes the lever so powerful? The fulcrum.
Yes. Yeah.
If you move that just a little bit, all of a sudden you can exert so much more power with such little effort, And I'll go back to this, because that very moment that I mentioned where the world-class, jazz bass player looked over at me and was like, I was in the zone. The next thing that happened was he made this sort of a gesture to play less. And that stuck with me too. The two things about that show that stuck with me. First of all, there needs to be more space, more room in what we do, especially when it's musical, because oftentimes it can just sound like a wall of sound, and you miss the nuance of it, right? And then as a metaphor for the world, look at how much content we're encouraged to make all the time. Content. The algorithm likes content, right? So make content. And a lot of that content isn't even grammar checked, right?
Oh, never.
Grammarly, for heaven's sakes, it's free. People use Grammarly. Fix those apostrophes. So that admonition, first of all, to be in the zone, like welcome, like lock in. You're in the tractor beam now, Bill. And then the very next thing is so important, to listen to what everybody else is doing. Don't create such a wall of what your thing is, whether that's music or healing or news or whatever, that it's impenetrable, because you are in this together, and the observer, right? We're all the observer. And so to make it all work, all of us have got to be observing the same thing, which takes some space. I mean, we got to be able to hear. I got to hear what Chris is playing. He's got to hear what I'm playing. We got to listen for the drummer. The bass has another thing to say. And if we're not doing that, we're not in the flow together. We're all just, kind of fighting in a way.
The best music comes from harmony. It comes from everyone working cohesively together, not fighting each other,
Yeah. And so in sync, so completely in sync that you're breathing together almost, or the hearts are beating at the same moment, or whatever it is that signifies that for you. Not more than mindset is where folks normally go. That's about as far as it goes. But when you talk about belief, immediately you've multiplied, exponentialized that mindset to a whole crew that thinks the same way about things and has the same set of beliefs. And that's amazing if you're monks praying over a woman with a tumor.
Right.
But it's not so amazing if you're, deploying a mob.
Right.
Right? Yeah, you're going to get results, but choose the results you want, right? And as musicians, we're choosing to go out there with an ear, shall we say, for what it's like to be in the zone together. And then whatever happens, happens. But without making that primary choice, it's not going to work,
It just made me think, Bill, too, of this is, I think, so important for just myself and I think a lot of other folks to realize or to be reminded of is, how do I want to articulate this? Because of our beliefs, we really don't even know how much we're closing ourselves off to things based on our very deeply seated beliefs that we're not even necessarily aware of. For example, my whole life growing up playing music, I sang all the time, love singing, and I even played in bands as a singer, yet I never consider myself a singer, ever. Never, 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 never. I'm an instrumentalist. That's a belief system, because a lot of the time when I sing, people will compliment it. And it's not that I need the external validation, but it's just an obvious case and point as to, I don't really know what I'm talking about when I have this belief. Really, though, it's like I made up this belief system that I'm not a vocalist. Who else made that up? No one. And if I were to perform and play and not say a damn thing, everyone would come up and fully assume I'm a vocalist. Fully would assume it, because I would just get out of my own way and not say anything, basically. But for only very, very, very recently, like within the last, I don't know, 6 or 5 months or something, have I finally gotten to a point where I feel I don't have any pressure anymore about singing. I don't care. I don't have a plan of what I'm going to do with it. I don't care anymore. I'm just going to do what feels good. And very recently, I caught myself saying it. I was talking to a friend and I was just in conversation, something to the effect of, well, I mean, like, I'm obviously not a vocalist. And I said that, and it was like, I felt it in my body. I was like, ooh, that does not ring true anymore.
Right.
It used to, but since this, newfound perspective on life, I found when I said stuff like that, I was just like, hold the phone. Why am I putting that limiting belief on myself? I'm the only one imposing it. No one else did. Yet that's a belief system that I believe. And therefore I don't treat it like I'm a vocalist. And one quick add to that, very, very recently started getting back into painting, into the visual arts. And that's another episode in of itself, Bill, we should totally talk about, because I'll tell you right now, the clarity, the peace, the joy, and like I'm talking 5-year-old childlike joy that I feel when I start to paint. Oh man. And I am not I'll say this specifically, the wording specifically, I'm not a trained painter, but I gotta say, after just letting myself go, no thoughts, no inhibitions, pure fun, joy, and expression, I looked at my interesting abstract concoctions and I love them. And I actually feel so proud of them that I'm like, I want to sell these, and I want to, or like maybe put some on the wall and sell some others. And I feel like I'm an artist. I actually feel like I could put this on the wall, and then someone's like, is this yours? I'm like, yes, it is. Yes, I'm an artist. I didn't go to school for this. I didn't train for this. And it's just because I believe, like, I really enjoyed what I was doing. I loved what I created. Why can't I be proud of that and consider myself an artist?
Exactly. And you're a pretty dang good singer, by the way.
Thank you.
Concert a couple of weeks ago with Sushila, and yeah, I heard some harmony in there. And you don't have to worry about explaining that one anymore.
Oh, well, thank you. And we're our own worst critics, right, Bill? Like, I mean,
completely.
My
territory, right?
Right. Like I'm like, well, I can't sing unless I sound like Sam Smith, or unless I sound like Sinatra, or unless that's where my, threshold is. And the biggest thing I can say to anyone who's trying to get into a new, whether it's singing or something else that is equally exhilarating and terrifying. And I would say that, you are your own unique voice. And the more you hone in on that versus trying to sound like these other artists, that you take what you want from them, because their influences I'm influenced by all these amazing artists, but I sound like me. I'm only going to sound like me, and I may as well hone in on my sound rather than try, to be like the next, whatever.
And let's just mention the amazing Canadian Leonard Cohen right now, because there's a cat who has like no voice,
yeah.
And yet, is he platinum? I mean, he's amazing.
Wow. At the very least, the Hallelujah is like one of the most covered songs of all time. So
incredible. And, Dance Me Into Love, first of all, poet, but you don't have to sing.
Yeah.
in that way, great. We got room for Pavarotti. We got room for, right. But go for it, because you never know. And he's not the only one. I can't think, there's so many people who just are like, how did they make it, as a top 40 artist with a voice like that? And yet, right.
Like, I was just thinking rap and hip hop,
literally
just spoken word poetry with music behind it. I mean, that's the only difference.
Yep.
Obviously there's rhythm and whatnot, but I mean, it's literally perfect music for non-vocalists, right?
Yeah.
Or for people that don't want to sing, don't like singing, or don't want to sing. So you're absolutely right. I mean, and that's what I felt with painting, where I was like, why do I have to feel like I need to spend, 4 or 5 years at an art school plus however much money on supplies and however much money on maybe private training and all this stuff to then feel okay about expressing myself through this form of art called painting? Why do I have to wait for all that? And this is how my brain works. Maybe not everyone thinks this way, but this is how I've been kind of conditioned, on these labels or these categories where I can't do something unless I'm credentialed or
good enough, right?
Good enough, right? It was like, we got to get this out of our head, because the joy I experienced doing this, and like, it was a joy and a release and a deep peace and fun that I didn't feel from music. Not that music is not fulfilling me. It was just different. It was because I didn't have all those years of training. I've been playing music since I was 5 or 6. I've got my whole life of music that I can base performances off of, critique with, and I have so much more going on in my mind with music. With art, I'm like, that looks cool.
Yeah, I mean, go for
my
it,
only thought process is like, that looks cool. Let's try that.
I heard you cite Bob Ross a little earlier on, so you're in the right lane. How many people do you think that guy has taught to paint? Like basic painting. It's got to be millions, right?
Millions.
I've seen him playing on the TV in the sports bars. It's like that. What's up with this? Is it his hair? I mean, I don't know. But
it's so soothing to watch somebody paint, though. I have to say, watching somebody paint is like obviously a gifted artist, especially.
My wife's a painter, and it's just, I've been watching painters for a long, long time, and especially the landscape painting, where you're outside, you're in the weeds, there's snakes, and it's windy and all that, and yet there's somebody with an easel, and you just watch that thing appear, and the magic, which is, I get this a little bit too with Bob Ross. So there's reasons that you do what you do. And for a long time, your painting looks like nothing.
Yeah.
In fact, it actually can look like crap.
Yeah.
And then there's a moment where the magic happens. It's like this one moment. And you're standing there and you're watching your buddy, and he's just like, putting paint on the canvas or the board or whatever. And then suddenly it comes alive.
Yep.
And I think that's the flow of painting. Like you're grinding it out. You're putting the darks where they go and the lights where they go, and it's like whatever. And sometimes you can watch painters and they paint the thing upside down so that they derail their eye from what they But there's that moment, and it's that magic moment that takes place, and you get goosebumps watching that.
I'm getting goosebumps listening to you talk about it right now.
I'm not that good.
No, but it's because it's putting me into that state of mind, and I, having just recently experienced it, it's just it's something so simple. And for those listening, I'd love for this, if there's a takeaway from this episode, quite a few actually takeaways, to be honest, but one of them would be this simplicity of things that we have at our fingertips, even in the crazy world. If you're somewhere that's all locked down right now and you can't do anything, there's still very, very simple things that we can do to bring an immense amount of relief, joy, bliss, play, creativity. And it could be literally as simple as throwing a piece of paper down and just throwing some colors on it, or doodling, noodling. Get on. If you do have access to that instrument, hop on. If you can't play it, great. Go on. Just hit things. See what it sounds like.
Put on your favorite music. Sing along.
Sing along. Do a karaoke night for yourself. Spotify even now has a whole lyric thing you can press now.
I just discovered that.
Me too. It's so great. I'm like, oh my God. So it's like straight up karaoke now.
Yeah.
So you just sing your favorite songs out loud, blast them so you can sing as loud as you want. And just have that, expression. It's so
do
good.
This free of like the ego thing that says I'm not a singer, right?
Yeah.
Or I'm not a painter. Like, put that aside. Nobody's going to, you're not being recorded for posterity right now.
No, you don't need to show it to anyone. Yeah.
Yeah. This is just about, letting yourself find your inner child, if that's the terminology you want to use, or be in the flow, or um,
Get out of your head.
Get out of your head. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason we say get out of your head, right? There's 2/3 of the body is experiencing stuff that your head doesn't. Might as well dial in on that, right? Find out what your heart has to say, or whether or not you're hungry, and
well, even your feet. My toes want to tap to a beat right now, or something.
Yeah,
right?
put it on.
I want to dance.
Get out of your zone with some 5/4 or something. Something you don't normally use. See what that'll do to you, and how it'll yank you from where you are to somewhere else. We've packed a lot in this episode. Anything more you want to say? I mean,
I think we're definitely good. We've hit a lot of things. I was just going to say, even on the dance front, like the Evan Christopher's, Farewell Blues that you sent me. That's a toe tapper. I was dancing in my kitchen just before we got on this call. It's probably why I'm such a good mood right now. So,
thank you, Evan.
Yeah, thank you, Evan. Honestly, and then that's the beauty of the simple things in life. When you're saying how that bass player, he's like, little less, Bill, little less. I have had very similar experiences in music, but they're a metaphor for life. Less is more. The simple things can bring immense amount of pleasure into your life, and focusing on what you have access to rather than what you don't is probably the best. And you'll be surprised at what you probably have access to, and what you can be doing right now to express yourself, and just to bring some childlike bliss and joy into your life.
Brother Chris, well said, man. Preach it. We need a musical pulpit.
We need those sound effects for the radio. Like pew 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 pew.
Yeah, right.
Brutal. I love it though.
Thank you for listening in on our conversation, and for taking time to show your appreciation with a like, share, or subscribe. Discussions of Music, Healing, and Consciousness is a practice of spontaneity, and we welcome your comments, ideas, and questions. There are ways to connect with us in the show notes, so let us hear from you. Until next time, this is Bill Protzman along with Chris Noble, wishing you great musical health. Samara Huchaya.